Hey everybody, it's Madison Gesiotto Gilbert, and we're back for another Republican Rundown. A lot has been going on. There's so much to talk about. I'm here with Tommy and Alec, and let's jump right into it. We're going to start out talking, of course, about our least favorite president, Joe Biden. Once again, lying to the American people, this time talking about promises made, promises kept. Take a look at this clip.
It comes down to a simple proposition. Promises made and promises kept.
Maybe it's just me, but this guy hasn't exactly kept the promises that he made on the campaign trail. And of course, ripping off one of President Trump's favorite lines from 2017, promises made, promises kept. Tommy, I don't know if you remember, but after President Trump took office, he actually created a website, Promises Made, Promises Kept, talking about all of the promises that he had made on the 2016 campaign trail and actually kept. And there was hundreds of them that you can go check out on that website. What do you think about Joe Biden trying to use this line in regards to his administration?
Yeah, I mean, if Biden was to make a website like that, it would be a very short website. It would be a blank page, basically.
Empty.
I mean, the only promise he's kept is to undermine American energy. That's the only one he's kept. During the entire campaign, he said, I'm going to attack American energy. I'm going to increase prices. And that's the promise he's kept. I mean, he talked about being an expert on the world stage. Instead, we have chaos. He promised a humane border system. We have the worst border crisis in U.S. history. He promised an economy that actually helps middle-class families. Instead, we have only 13% of Americans saying they're better off under Bidenomics. I honestly can't think, besides attacking American energy, of a single promise that Joe Biden actually has kept, and certainly not one that's actually made the American people better off.
Right. And you look back to 2020 and you look back to him telling people, if you make under $400,000, you won't pay a penny more, when in reality, people making $25,000 are paying more now under his administration. So the impacts negatively are very real for people all across the country, especially for families across the country that are struggling to provide as a result of this horrible economy. Obviously, we could go down the list. But what else comes to your mind, Alec, when you think of the failures of the Biden administration?
Well, even the big ticket liberal items that Biden promised on the campaign trail, he hasn't followed through on. We're talking about eliminating mandatory minimum sentencing, something that he actually had a hand in starting in the 1994 crime bill. He hasn't done that. He hasn't decriminalized weed. He hasn't raised the minimum wage to $15. These are things that he promised his base to earn their vote, get their vote, and he's just completely fallen through for them. And so even if you are coming from the Democrat side, if you're a liberal, I don't see why you vote for him a second time around.
Right. And how about unity? Another promise he made, Tommy, repeatedly, saying he's going to be the president of unity. They're going to bring people together after 2020. Do you feel, when you're in D.C. or across the country, that we're a more unified nation post a Joe Biden administration 3 years in?
I mean, definitely not. I mean, you have an administration that is targeting pro-life Americans, targeting parents, smearing people that want voter ID and other common sense election integrity measures. You have an administration that is targeting political opponents, an administration where Joe Biden goes out and smears people all the time, literally try to deflect from his own failures. And to go to Alec's point, I think one of the biggest problems Joe Biden has is the Constitution, because a lot of the promises he's made violate the Constitution of the United States of America. So he's had a big problem when it comes to the Constitution. He has a big problem with the American people not supporting his agenda. And I think we're definitely a more divided country because of Joe Biden with these false promises, these smears that he makes almost on a daily basis, almost every single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the biggest promises that Joe Biden made on the campaign trail was that Hunter Biden's laptop was complete Russian misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah,
it was fake. It was false. And we know now that's just Joe Biden was lying through his teeth. They knew the whole time. The DOJ has come out and said, yeah, this is totally real. Hunter Biden's lawyer team has come out and said, yeah, it's his laptop. They knew the entire time.
How quickly their story changes, right? But I think this is a good point and something we should continue to focus on as Republicans as we see the disunity across the country. But I think that should be motivation for us as Republicans more than ever before to come together this year. The chairwoman talks about it. I talk about it. Tommy, I know you've talked about it on radio as well, how important that unity is for us as a party, how important it is that as we move forward, that we come together behind not only our presidential nominee, but behind our candidates, recognizing that any one of our Republican candidates is better than what the other side has to offer. This is not the Democratic Party of our parents or grandparents. These are not moderate Democrats that may have stuff in line with our views. The reality is they're very far left. These people are very out there. They have views that simply don't line up with the majority of Americans. Talk, Tommy, a little bit about why the unity is going to be such a critical piece of our victory this year, and why we're the party that needs to bring independence and bring people over and unite to win, to solve these problems that are impacting people.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alec touched on part of it, where you have Joe Biden going out there lying and spreading misinformation in 2020 about Hunter Biden's laptop, and the mainstream media is repeating those lies verbatim. That is what we're up against, this bias from the mainstream media that is repeating Democrat lies verbatim, censoring information. If we're not united on our side of the aisle, if Republicans aren't united, then the Democrats are going to keep on smearing, keep on lying, and they're going to go unchecked. At the RNC, we're checking them every single day at factcheckbiden.com, but we need to come together to make sure Republicans across the country are doing that because of the bias we're up against, because of the smears and the lies that Joe Biden is already putting out there, because of all the money that Democrats are spending flat out lying about Republican records, flat out lying about Republican policies. We have to come together. We have to make that plan to bank your vote at bankyourvote.com. We have to do that in order to go against this bias, to expose the lies that Joe Biden and Democrats are putting out there, because the media is not going to do it. The Republican Party has to do it. We have to do it. We are doing it. We're going to keep doing it, but we have to come together to make sure that we beat Biden in November. And if we don't beat Biden, we give him 4 more years. This country simply can't afford that.
That's right. I agree with that fully. Alec, when you think about unity, you think about the party, what do you think the message is that we can continue to send to people, inviting these independents, inviting people that maybe even voted for Joe Biden in the last election, but are unhappy with the direction of the country, unhappy with the way things are going? What do you think we can be telling them to get them over to the Republican side by this November?
I mean, I think it comes down to just the simple fact that things are more expensive now. I think that's one of the best in winning in that, both in Iowa and New Hampshire, is that voters are focused on the economy. And Joe Biden's economy is not doing very well and hasn't done very well for quite some time. He's claimed that he has been revitalizing the economy, but in reality, he inherited a recovery from COVID and turned it into nearly a recession. And so I think that voters are really caring about, the bottom dollar. And Joe Biden has hit them where it hurts the most, their wallets.
Absolutely. And this is something we've seen time and time again for so many elections, all the way back to before we were all born, impacting people's votes. So I think that's a very good point. And Tommy, I know you and I have talked about the border and immigration being another one of those issues that was big in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Alec mentioned the economy. Border was right number 2. And I think it's a great contrast between the promises that Biden has failed to keep and the promises that Republicans are keeping. This week, the House Homeland Security Committee advanced articles of impeachment out of committee against Secretary Mayorkas, those articles being the breach of public trust and the willful refusal to enforce the law. And I think when you look at the record of Biden and Mayorkas, it has been a complete failure. We actually have a clip of Mayorkas before Congress that I think is just astounding that he said this under oath. If we could play that clip.
It is my testimony that the border is secure, and we are working every day, day and night, to increase its security. The challenges that we are experiencing at the border cannot be overstated.
So he literally testifies before Congress that the border is secure, which is in direct contradiction to the former Border Patrol Chief, Raul Ortiz, who went before Congress and said we don't have operational control of the border, that cartels have operational control of the border, that Border Patrol does not control the border. If you don't have control of the border, it can't be secure. Madison, when you hear Mayorkas saying this stuff before Congress, repeating it in the media, what's your reaction to Mayorkas insisting that the border is secure and the House Republicans' effort to hold him accountable?
Not surprised, but I'm no less disappointed when I hear him and many others from the administration speak about the border. It's almost unreal what we see happening at the border in just 3 short years. They've really destroyed our country for years to come in so many ways. And this is one good example of that. It's going to take a long time to fix what they've done, and a lot of lives will be impacted as a result of it. And again, as I've pressed so many times on Republican Rundown and other places, it's not even just about who's coming over the border. We now see that it's over 302,000 people encountered in the month of December alone, highest number ever recorded by DHS. But we're also talking about what's coming over the border, and over 1,100 pounds of fentanyl seized in December. This is enough to kill our entire population. And they're saying that's only 5 to 10% of what's actually coming over is what's seized. So it's incredible when you see those numbers and you really put them in perspective. Oregon, a very liberal state, as we all know, now their governor, who's a Democrat, declaring a state of emergency in Portland because of the fentanyl deaths they're seeing there. They're very quickly trying to walk back the drug decriminalization law that they put into effect in 2020, and now bipartisanly, Democrats and Republicans trying to kind of reverse some of that, not all of it, but some of it, recognizing that it's been very bad, like as if, decriminalization of all drugs, including hard drugs, was a good idea ever. But Democrats thought it was, and now they're seeing the lives impacted, the lives lost in Portland, in Oregon as a result. And so I think across the country, you're starting to see how the border is intertwined with so many of these issues cities are seeing.
Yeah, and Alec, I think it's a sort of, if I was to look at this, I would think it would be like a whole picture of a failure of Democrat policies, from an open border on the federal level to sanctuary city policies and jurisdictions to refusing to actually enforce the law when it comes to illegal drugs. It seems like the crisis we're seeing is the result of Democrat policies, not just from Joe Biden, but up and down the ballot.
The Democrats are unequipped philosophically to handle this crisis. They want the open borders. They are soft on crime. And they have established all these sanctuary cities on the name of being progressive and making sure that their neighbors aren't calling them out for not being progressive enough. And so because of this, we have a building opioid crisis in the United States. It hasn't stopped. We are continuing to see youths and teenagers die at record rates to opioids. And the Democrats just want the crisis to continue. Joe Biden is fighting Governor Abbott in Texas right now to keep the border open. Governor Abbott is doing his best to close the border, to stem the tide, and the federal government is standing in his way.
Yeah, and I think it also shows just the scale of this crisis. I mean, Madison, you mentioned the 5 to 10%, only catching 5 to 10% of the fentanyl coming over. That is hard, I think, for a lot of Americans to really see the size of this, because they hear Biden out there outrageously claiming his border policy is working, but in reality, 5 to 10% only is what they're catching. This is a scale, a threat of massive proportions. It's maybe one of the largest national security threats, if not the largest national security threat that we face as Americans, is this open border.
100%. I mean, it's unreal when you think about the numbers. And again, when you put them in perspective, I think you make a good point, Tommy, talking about how people can't really grasp the extent, the size of the crisis. They're seeing the videos. They're starting to understand how bad the border really is. But when it comes to the drug numbers specifically, I don't think people really realize what's coming over and the impact that can have in cities and communities and across the country long term. Again, not only who, but what. But when we go back to who's coming over the border, we're also talking about people on the terror watch list. We're talking about people that wish ill will upon the American people, that want to see our country destroyed, getting into the country through that southern border. When you talk about who comes into your front door at your house, who comes into your business, you have safeguards in place. You lock your doors at night, you lock your windows, you put your security system on. A lot of these Democrat politicians always talking about let anybody and everybody through, but I guarantee you they wouldn't be letting everybody and anybody through their front door. We need to treat our country the same way we treat our own lives and make sure that we're protected, make sure our country's protected. It's what our government owes to us.
Yeah, I think that analogy of someone's home is actually a really good one, especially when you look at what Biden's done to the border. He basically unlocked the door, opened the door, and now claims you can't close it again. That's exactly what he's done with the border. And I think that was made really plain when he was asked just the other day, and we have this clip if we can play it here, asked what he could do on the border. And he basically said that he couldn't do anything, if we could play that clip.
With executive authority, or is there more you could do?
Not all I can do. Give me the power. I've asked for the very day I got in office. Give me the border patrol. Give me the people. Give me the people, the judges. Give me the people who can stop this and make it work for us.
So, Alec, there's so much wrong with that clip. First of all, claiming that his bill that would have just completely opened the border even more was somehow a solution to this crisis, when in reality he signed 94 executive actions in his first 100 days opening the border, and then claiming he can't reverse those executive actions. I mean, the cognitive dissonance to completely act like he's not responsible for this is astounding, but I guess not surprising from Joe Biden.
That's right. It's not surprising from Joe Biden. I think it's important to remember that House Republicans have a bill. They have a bill. They've passed a bill. There's a bill ready to be put into law to be signed, the Secure the Border Act. It's that simple. They passed it months ago. In reality, Joe Biden can end the border crisis anytime he wants to, and he refuses to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Anytime he wants to, he could end it, but he refuses to. And Madison, when I'm looking at that, it's hard not to view this crisis then as intentional, because if he could solve it and he refuses to, he either is completely incompetent or this is intentional. I don't really see another option here when it comes to Joe Biden in this border crisis.
Well, I mean, he created the crisis. I mean, one of his very first things after taking office was to halt construction of the border wall and then sell off materials for pennies on the dollar of what we already purchased them for. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's unacceptable. It's beyond incompetence. It does feel very intentional when you look at it, especially considering his executive actions and what he has supported over the years since becoming president. I find it very hard to believe that he has any intention or care to solve the crisis. I think if he did, this would have been taken care of already. At the very least, obviously, the border would have been secured. It would be taking steps to secure the border in a larger way to which we could start addressing the other problems that have been created as a result. Even before he did these actions, before this became the issue that it is today, we already had a broken immigration system that needed fixed, that needed solving. And so now he's just compiled problem after problem on top of that. That'll really, quite honestly, even with good leadership, take a very long time to fix. This is not an overnight solution after securing the border, but that first step is securing the border, and that's where we have to start.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And this incompetence when it comes to the border, this national security threat we face, unfortunately, isn't just the only one. I mean, we see this incompetence on the world stage. Madison, I thought you had a really interesting Madison Minute yesterday on the UN. I was hoping you could talk a bit more about that in terms of the money that Biden is just sending overseas and really to dubious at best people. I mean, really heinous people that he's sending money to.
Yeah, so yesterday, if you missed the Madison Minute, make sure you go back to our social media pages and watch it. Really quickly broke this down for people, talking about UNRWA, which is the largest UN aid agency in Gaza. Back in 2018, President Trump cut funding to UNRWA. Obviously, a lot of talk about terror ties. We've been hearing about that the past couple days. But immediately after taking office, Joe Biden reinstates the funding. And basically, we as the United States become the largest contributor to UNRWA in the world. Then fast forward to 2023, October 7th terror attack in Israel by Hamas, as we all witnessed the horrendous atrocities on that day. Now it's coming to light that at least 12, many saying 13, people who worked for UNRWA actually engaged in the terror attack, were not only part of Hamas, which they're saying there's many, many more part of Hamas in the group, in the organization. However, 12 to 13, maybe more, actually participated in the atrocities. Some even actually one at least, maybe more, part of raiding a kibbutz and acting and engaging in violence against people there. Very, very difficult to even think about that we're funding these type of people. And then one of the other people actually confirmed to have participated in hostage taking. And so very, very unacceptable. And now the Biden administration comes out saying, hey, we're pausing funding to UNRWA. But what many people don't realize is that since October, they've already given almost all, over 99% of the $121 million they had allotted to UNRWA. They've only paused $300,000 of $121 million. Very unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. And again, just shows another example of the Biden administration's decisions in opposition to Republican leadership, in opposition to the Trump administration, being just a complete disaster. We should have stuck with what President Trump did in 2018 and never restored funding to UNRWA in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an astounding lesson that the Biden administration refuses to learn, that you should not send money to terrorists or terrorist funders. I mean, that should be a basic understanding that the Biden administration refuses to learn. And Alec, part of what I think is so disturbing about this example is that it's not like this was a surprise, unfortunately, that UNRWA was engaged or had employees that were connected to terrorism. That was part of the reason why that funding was cut years ago. So the Biden administration was warned, and yet they still went forward with restoring that funding despite the warnings.
That's right, Tommy. Not only were UNRWA employees taking part in the October 7th massacre, but their fellow employees were cheering them on online. There was a Telegram channel that existed with some 3,000 employees of UNRWA who were all named and included their employee ID numbers in the chat that were cheering and celebrating on the day and after the October 7th attack on Israel. And I've been to Israel. I've been to Ashkelon and Sderot and some of these kibbutzes that were attacked, and they were beautiful places full of beautiful people. And what Hamas, with the help of UNRWA employees, did on October 7th is horrific and one of the worst terrorist attacks in history, especially on Israel. And Hamas's reign of terror cannot be allowed to continue, and calls for a ceasefire really just help strengthen Hamas's position.
And I think we see similar mistakes being made by the Biden administration when it comes to Iran, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. Tommy, you and I have talked about this before, but again, the Biden administration, knowing that Iran's the largest state sponsor of terror, knowing what type of intentions they have, not only against us, but against our allies, and continued to not only provide funding, but unfreeze funds in so many different ways, enable their behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's outrageous. Again, they were warned about Iran. I think the scale at UNRWA, which Alec pointed out, shows that the Biden administration's release of those funds was unacceptable from the beginning. It goes to this whole pattern of the Biden administration making excuses so that they can keep sending as much money as possible to terrorists. It's absolutely outrageous, whether it's UNRWA, where you have John Kirby saying we can't condemn the whole organization just yesterday, despite the scale that Alec talked about. You have Iran, who is funding proxies right now. Biden out there saying they are giving the money to these proxies that are attacking U.S. troops, and yet they still have not cut off the funding from Iranian oil sales. I think it goes to, and then this is really the whole big picture of this, the Biden administration's naivete when it comes to this, their complete lack of understanding when it comes to this. We actually have a clip that shows the contrast of the peace that Biden inherited versus the chaos that they've created, if we could show that clip.
The Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades.
I would argue that we've not seen a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 1973.
So you basically have a situation where you have Sullivan going out there claiming the Middle East is the quietest that it's been in 2 decades, which was going on under Trump. You had peace agreements, versus now it's the most dangerous since 1973. Alec, when I see that two contrasts, I think the only logical conclusion someone can make is that the danger we're seeing in the Middle East is fueled by Biden's completely disastrous and failed foreign policy.
Yeah. Joe Biden is such a foreign policy expert that he took a lasting peace, a record peace, and turned it into a brutal and bloody war in 4 months. And is a shocking indictment on Joe Biden's foreign policy chops that he claims he has. And I think it's been clear through his mishandling of every situation as far as foreign policy goes that he has encountered in his presidency thus far. It's just preposterous to believe that Joe Biden has any experience in foreign policy at all.
Yeah, and his experience is only failing. I mean, Madison, I'm reminded of that quote from Robert Gates that Joe Biden has been wrong on every single substantial national security issue in this country in the last 4 decades. Unfortunately, it seems like that's been borne out by Biden's record as president, where we've gone from one crisis and chaos to the next.
I think the reality is the world was simply a safer place before Joe Biden was president, which is why we need to elect a Republican president this November, which is why we need to kick Joe Biden out of office, retire Joe Biden permanently out of our government. We don't need him. There's a lot of people like him that we need to get rid of in there. And so it's going to be so important when we go to the ballot box this November that not only do we elect a Republican at the top of the ticket, but we elect Republicans down ticket to start fixing these problems.
Yeah, I mean, and I think anyone that's expecting a change from Joe Biden just needs to look at what Joe Biden and how he views the Afghanistan withdrawal, thinking that that was an extraordinary success. So if anyone expects Joe Biden to learn from his mistakes, learn from 4 decades of failure, he's shown that he doesn't do that. He doubles down on failure. He doubles down on chaos. There's no light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to Joe Biden being president. It's going to be one crisis after the other. The only light at the end of the tunnel is Joe Biden losing in November and us electing a Republican.
That's right. If you're considering voting for Joe Biden this November, if you voted for him in 2020 and you think he's done a good job and you're going to vote for him again, wake up. The reality is that's not going to happen. You have to vote Republican to save this country.
Yeah, and Alec, we only have a few minutes left here. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts in terms of, like, if you were to talk to a voter saying, you know, a Democrat or independent that is looking at this chaos and to try and decide how to vote, what would your argument to them be?
I don't think anyone who has been paying attention these last 3 or 4 years can really believe anything that Joe Biden says he is doing or he has done or he will do. You can't take him at face value because it's either false or misleading or just flat out untrue. And I think that most voters are waking up to this.
That's why Bank Your Vote's so important, though, to make sure that we are using every single tool that we can to elect a Republican in November, making sure that we're going against the smears and the lies and the bias in the mainstream media, getting those votes early. That's so important when it comes to making sure that we're united, like we were saying earlier, making sure that we're using all of our resources to target those voters, freeing up those resources to make sure that every single Republican banks their vote early and we get as many Republicans to vote as possible.
Amen to that. We'll be back again next week with another Republican rundown. A lot of great things talked about today. I know there'll be a lot more news in the coming days, so we look forward to you guys joining us next Thursday. Thanks.
Thanks.